Martin, good morning. How's Austria these days?
Good morning, Stoyan. It's breathing hot. We expect 35 degrees today here in Vienna, so everybody is kind of good sweating, but super good. Thanks a lot.
Is that not normal? Is that like a high temperature for
I
Austria?
would say it's a quite high temperature for us. And you know, Austrians have this mentality to complain about whether the weather is too warm or whether the weather is too cold. So we have four
Mm.
seasons and always a good opinion about the weather.
Always an opportunity to complain about the weather.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great hack when you ask people, "Wow, what do you think about the weather?" So people really can good vent off and either be positive about the weather or negative about the weather, and then the trash bin is emptied already before you start a real conversation. So I use that a lot of as a tactic to get people arriving, and whatever their state of mind is, they can already a bit work through their emotions before you start the real work.
I love it, man. I love it. But you have your coffee now. Hopefully everybody joining us live have their coffee with them and is ready for a conversation. Martin has already been a guest on the podcast, but today we will talk about your new book. Very excited about it. I had the chance to not to read the whole book, but to go through the book, and it's really exciting. And I love the very structured approach. Like every chapter is kind of structured in a very specific way, so it's easy to once you read the book, get back to the book and just more like a catalog, go to one of the 45 dynamics. But tell us about the book. What's the name of the book? Why did you decide to write this book?
Yeah, the book is called The Psychology of Workplace Dynamics, and workplace dynamics are recurring patterns that I've seen in my work since 20 years with organizations over and over. It's something where an institutionalized behavior appears and people don't realize that. For example, you always have a bad boss. You always have a colleague who tries to cut you. You always have power struggles in your organization. And in the last 10 years, I focused a lot on what makes humans tick the way they tick. So I was curious, why do some people succeed? Why do others always fail? And what does that have to do with our brain and with our human psychology? And in the book, I took 45 patterns that are the most common, ranging from power dynamics, like who is the boss, to communication, to change and adaptability, up to how do you deal with motivation and engagement. Each of the 5 chapters has 9 psychological patterns, and we have a look on how do people feel who are in that loop, what is going on in your brain, what is a hack that you can use to overcome that problem, and what are warning signs, because this is something that really costs organizations a lot of money and employees and leaders a lot of nerves. So I thought it's time to create a little, library of best-selling loops. And I found out that there is no book in that dimension available at the moment. So I was eager to set the first stone, and now I'm working on the next 45.
What was the process of writing the book? When did you start? How did you decide how to structure the book? And was it challenging to put together this piece of work?
To be honest, I underestimated the effort because I had this map of the 45 pretty much mapped out within a week, because I do that since 20 years. So there are these classic problems that you always see when you enter an organization. What really was more intense that I expected is how do you structure the massive amount of information. And when you have the book in front of you, it's like 250 pages around it. It was really hard for me to cut out the fat and really stick to the things that are fast applicable, easy applicable. And that took a lot of iteration loops. I think we've done 35 to 40 usability feedbacks where we worked with leaders who are already in organizations, got their feedback. I wanted to make sure it's filled, but on the other hand, not overwhelming. And now you have in the beginning of the book a self-assessment. So there is a little QR code, and you can fill out how you feel at the moment at your work, or how you feel with your client that you're working with. And as a result, you receive the top 5 patterns that are most important for you. So you don't have to read the book end to end. You can directly start with the patterns that seem to be most pressing, most painful, or most potentialous to, gain a bit more thrive, a bit more energy, a bit more, positive spin in your organization as well. It's not always negative, but most of them are connected to a pain. Some of them are connected to energy that is already there. How do you amplify best practices? And I'm quite happy with that. It's very nice. I receive a ping once somebody scans that code and fills it out, and I take the time to personally answer this semi-automated process, so people get a short note from me why I like this pattern a lot and how they, can use it to the maximum.
So in the book, the definition of workplace dynamics is workplace dynamics are recurring patterns of action and reaction that emerge when individuals interact. So the word recurring patterns, I think, would be something some people might find new. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I want to add, it's not only recurring, it's mostly about unmet needs or needs that are not outspoken. I give you a very easy example. You have a new colleague in your team, and this person shows up the first time in a team meeting. And as every new person in a team, this person raises their hand and really throws good ideas and want to thrive and give a lot of good expectations about how this person wants to improve, the structure or the processes within your team. And now let's take a short stop, and everybody who listens now, think for yourself. How would you think about that person? Would you say, wow, that's an ego person, this person only wants to show light? Or would you think, how cool is that? There is a person who really thrives and gives new energy. I'm happy to have such a strong player on my team. Or it might appear that an old pain shows up from you, that you say, my boss never allows me to speak about my good ideas. So, and what happens here is an interpretation of an employee, of you, and you might react on that by pulling away, by not liking that person, by, not supporting that person immediately. And this new person will realize that and say, hey, Stoyan is somehow looking weird every time I raise my hand. So this person will act defensive. And here you are already in a loop, because the next time when we both come in a meeting, the new person will say, I should probably hold a bit back because Stoyan looks skeptical about me. And you, Stoyan, might have the opinion, I know you won't, but just for the example, hey, I think this is an ego person, I need to be careful. I should cut them a bit short. And now you are in a loop of two people that shapes the whole team dynamic, because people will realize that the person started with high energy and get lower and lower. And this is a misunderstanding at the end. It's needs that are not met that have a huge impact on the success of a team, on the success of an organization, and as well as a leader. I love the example of micromanagement, because this is something everybody talks about. Like, no matter in which country I travel, people tell me, I know micromanagement. And I took an alternative loop on that and tried to unmantle what makes a micromanager. And it's the high need for security. And if you understand that a micromanager is not an evil person necessarily, and most of the times, it's not a narcissist, it's not, there are no psychological negative patterns onto micromanagement. It's a need for security, for safety, for stability. But when a micromanager acts like a micromanager, he has big negative impact, and I say he because it's mostly men. He has big negative impact on his employee, because what happens, I try to control you, Stoyan, because I have the need to know everything. And you will learn that you can be a child who has a parent that takes care of everything. So you will stop taking responsibility, you will pull out your own autonomy, you will pull out the responsibility feelings you have. And here we are back in the loop. Me as micromanager, I see you doing less and less, taking less and less responsibility, so my fear gets triggered even more, and I micromanage you even harder. And these are typical loops that appear over and over again, And I realized in my work that very often people believe this is about an individual trait. The micromanager is a bad person. The person who does, raise the hand is an ego-driven person. But most of the time, it's unspoken, recurring patterns that we don't even think about because life is busy, work is busy. So we just act out of our gut feeling. And these misunderstandings really blow up to very intense patterns that can shape the culture of an organization deeply.
Let's dive into the micromanagement. I love what you say, and I totally agree. Often this is a negative dynamic. There are some situations, though, that a leader who's not a micromanager is micromanaging. And these are often situations when you have let's say more junior person that you don't trust that they deliver yet on a specific skill or a task. And then maybe the definition of micromanagement is something else. I don't know, in your world. But you know what I mean? Like, you micromanage not always because you're not feeling secure, but because who is the person in front of you that you delegate to? Right? Like, if I talk to you, Martin, you have a lot of experience in certain areas. I don't need to micromanage you. Maybe somebody else who has these micromanagement tendencies will do it anyway. But if I know how good you are, I'll be like, hey, Martin, let us get clear what you're after. Okay, great. If you need something, get back to me. I'm not going to micromanage you because I know you will deliver. But there will be some intern, for example, that you might have to do a little bit more of micromanagement on. Or is it not? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. I think micromanagement, per definition, is about taking too much control over an employee. And I think the question is here, what is too much? At the end, our brain in the prefrontal cortex, that's the front part of your forehead, is managing all the tough thinking. That's very simplified. And your prefrontal cortex realizes when it gets less and less work. So if you, as my manager, and I'm the junior, manage me very, close, and you ask me a lot of questions and you make sure I don't fuck up, then my prefrontal cortex tells my subconscious, hey, Martin, you don't have to perform here. You don't need your capacity of brain. So you can lean back and just go in children mode, because Stoyan is taking responsibility for me. And that's an individual thing. So my brain might be very ambitious and wants to work all the time. So if you just micromanage me a little bit, my brain already goes in leaning back modus and says, okay, I don't need to perform anymore. And then subconsciously, this is something we don't do on purpose. We just avoid responsibility. And for the micromanager, there we have this amygdala, that's the deep part in the brain that is responsible for the flight, freeze, and run away reaction in our brain. The micromanager easily have the feeling, if I don't control Martin enough, the world is gonna end. And depending on how stressed you are as a leader, this is more reactive or less reactive in certain situations. So you might be not a micromanager when everything goes great, and then comes COVID-19 and you become a micromanager because your brain is in permanent stress. So it's not a static thing. It's a balance about how much internal safety need do I need as a leader, and how much challenge do you need as my employee when we are talking about tasks. And if you are not aware of that principles, you basically fail even if you do the same structure for every employee, because your employees are different and they might have more ambition or less ambition. A good strategy for that is really to have a look on how much can I put on that person, how much belief and trust can I put on a person. And I'm not advocating for trust blindly, but think in my book I call about the trust compass. So set a direction, talk with the employee how much liberty they need, and then test it out, because trust is built based on try and error. So if I say, Stoyan, today you take the responsibility for this aspect of the project, and in 2 weeks we're going to have a look how specific behaviors or specific goals have been achieved, and then we adjust. Was that enough or too little trust? And having that conversation with your employee really helps to find the right way. And once you have that right distance, I think good leaders know that, then it just runs. And a lot of people have a good gut feeling and know, like you said before, Martin, I would never micromanage you because you are so self-driven. That are the obvious examples. But sometimes people are more, or less extrovert, or show less of their emotions and show less of how ambitious they are, how self-critic they are, how perfectionists they are. And what I realized is that for a leader, it really takes the effort to think about what's my need, self-awareness. I'm thinking of your book, Stoyan, you talk a lot about self-awareness. I really need to know, am I anxious today? Am I stressed out today? Because when I'm stressed, I want to be under control. My brain doesn't want to burn extra energy for worrying if Stoyan delivered his task. But if I'm in a good mode, if I'm in my peak performance zone, I will not care so much. I can lean a bit more back into trust. And the second aspect is, what does my employee need? And the easiest way to find out is to ask, do you like to work, as free as possible? And I like here to be bold. When I work with people in my team, I tell them, I say, I have the feeling you don't want a boss that stands in your way. Am I right? And people who feel like that say, yes, finally somebody sees me. And then I really try to do that. I say, what's the best way you can update me? Because I'm an insecure person and sometimes I need to, to feel to be in control. And then they come up with solutions and tell me, hey, we should meet once a week and I will give you the highlights. Is that okay for you? And here we are in a conversation where I, as a leader, don't have to practice analyzing my employee. People know what they like most of the time. If they are very junior, you have to help them a little, but it all starts with yourself and really finding out what's your need of security.
And you mentioned also in the book, I think one of the dynamics is clarity of expectations. And I feel like it's kind of the beginning of everything. Like, and not only it's the beginning of everything to have very clear expectations with the people that you lead, the people that you work with, on what are the goals, what are the objectives, but also how do we check in? How much responsibility I'm going to give you? How are you going to measure the performance? How often are we going to talk? And all these kind of things to be aligned around, because you cannot figure it out from the get-go. Some people need to be managed more. Some people want more direction. And if you don't know the person, you might be assuming, oh, I'm probably not giving them enough responsibility, and they're probably not feeling that they're challenged enough. I've done this mistake, Martin, by the way, because I want people to take ownership and to be empowered to make decisions. And I've done this mistake of allowing too much freedom. And they don't know what to do because I haven't really showed them an example. I haven't really set the expectations clear. And then we have a one-on-one, and I ask them, how's everything? And how's the work and the way they work with me? And they're like, I feel like I need more direction. And I'm like, ooh, I went a little bit to the other side because I wanted to empower people to be leaders, but I didn't really start with giving an example, grabbing them by the hand and just showing them how I expect things to be. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, and thanks for highlighting that, all the 45 patterns I experienced myself somewhere, somehow. And the more you study psychology, the more you find out you are broken somehow. So don't get me wrong. If you read that, nothing here comes from a point of superiority. It comes from a deep exploration of my own mistakes. I did all that mistakes in one or another way. And once you realize for yourself, it's easier to see these patterns, in organizations for others. Clarity of expectations is the performance killer number one. I put it as the first dynamic in my book because, Stoyan, you and me both come from an agency background. You were in film production. I worked with a big advertising agency. And what I learned there very early in my career is an unclear briefing really kills your efficiency in executing something. So I give you an example. In advertising world, somebody says, make me a nice campaign. And that could mean everything. And when I was very junior in the advertising agency, I said to Coca-Cola, okay, let's make a nice campaign. And the variety that can come back, what means a nice campaign, is limitless. And very often in our daily business in organizations, I hear, hey, Stoyan, can you just finish up the presentation? And depending on what's your working modus, finishing up a presentation could mean you just do the remaining 5% that are needed, or you deep dive and excel the, I should not curse so much, excel the out of you, and you sit the next 3 weeks and perfectionize this deck to the degree that it's already absurd. And that is really everything within the briefing. Hey, can you just finish that deck? And we don't know. So that's a double-edged sword. Once for leaders, we have to be aware that ideas don't stick. So when we say, I have an idea of a finished presentation, or I have an idea of a nice campaign, this is something our brain cannot process. We will make up our own imagination and believe we are totally right. You have to talk about details, about behaviors, about specifics. In goal setting, this is already very common, but I very often see in this day-to-day execution that you just say, can you do that for me? And that's more of an idea than a behavior. But if I tell you, can you finish up the presentation so we look good in front of the client, so make sure we have no typos in it, and please make sure everything is nice aligned. Don't put too much effort in it. Then it gets more and more clear. And that's something we have the responsibilities as task leaders, as managers, as founders, but as well, I believe employees have the right and the obligation to demand that. And that's something where I really empower everyone who sits under a manager that is very busy or under a manager that gives very vague briefings. How much time do you want me to spend on this deck, Martin? Get a time contingent. What are the most important things you want to see? And this is a question that takes only 1 to 2 minutes as answer. And if you don't get that answer, I highly advocate, if it's safe, to rebel against it and say, listen here, without that information, I'm lost. Because that's what happens in your brain. If you get unspecific information, we are again in the front part of our brain gets nuts. Because our brain thinks this is an unclear algorithm. We run a bit like a computer. And the computer says, nay, and says, that doesn't work out for me. And then you either feel very uncertain because you have the feeling you're not able to fulfill the task. And what happens next is that your self-confidence erodes. Because if I tell you, can you finish that presentation, and you sit there and say, I have no clue what I have to do now, that's not good for your self-confidence. And our brain then reacts by sending out some hormones. I don't want to make it too biological, sends out some hormones, and that will lower your self-confidence. And even though you are a good employee and you're very smart and you're very ambitious and you did that task before, it might happen that you have the feeling, I cannot satisfy my boss. And that's a problem. I more than once heard from very experienced employees, means 10 years or more experience in their job, that they entered a new organization and they came to me in a coaching and said, Martin, I'm a consultant for 10 years and it feels all my tools don't work anymore. I cannot apply what I did before because this organization is super nice, but something is weird. And in that specific case, it was an organization where everybody was friendly and very modern, and it was from the outside a really cool company. But what we found out is that the employee didn't receive specific briefings. It was everything already clear somehow between the lines, and that didn't work for that specific expert. And what he did is taking ownership of getting a good briefing. And I highly advocate for everyone who has the feeling self-confidence erodes or you feel you are not utilizing what you're really able to do, be picky with the briefing. Because if you get a good briefing, the rest of the project is going to be easy for you. If you know, Stoyan loves to get nice pictures in a presentation, and he really loves that more than having, no typos. I'm just assuming, and I'm not saying that's true. Um, then you will focus a bit more on getting the nice eye candy pictures, and then you will get the reward. And if you are not sure, you have to ask the people. So on one hand, Stoyan, yes, I think it's your responsibility as a manager to think about how much time and detail do you offer to an employee or to a colleague to work out specifically the goals that you expect. But on the other hand, there is a return responsibility from an employee to make sure they don't accept bullshit briefings. When I work with my teams, I tell them, you are 50% responsible that I don't bullshit you. So let's be fair. Sometimes I'm going to be stressed or I'm going to be over the top, and I did that 1,000 times. So I don't think anymore in that specifics. And you have the full right to tell me, Martin, this is bullshit. Let's take 5 minutes and sit down and make that more specific. And this is something you have to learn with employees because it's not common in organizations. But once they get used to it, they become machines in showing you and giving you feedback where you are unclear. And I love that because it's a way for me to grow as a leader, and it's a way for them to get what they want and knowing that they have the right to ask for it. And I think that's something, the more stress and the more busy the business is, the harder it is to achieve that. So if you run, I don't know, an event company and it's the day X and the event is running, then there might be not always time to rebel for that. So be careful. You need to have a safe place, but in general, I would advise to share the responsibility with your team, with your colleagues, with your peers, and be open and transparent about you might be imprecise in explaining something like that, and share the responsibility. Both sides can grow out of that.
I love that you're talking about that. Because sometimes if we're in a leadership position, we're always pointing fingers at employees. If we are an employee, we're pointing finger, the manager is not clear. How about you start? How about you pick up the change? How about you request clarity? And if you're a manager, as Martin said, sometimes you're super stressed, you're super overwhelmed. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. You should be as clear as you can be. And even in the book, you mentioned this concept of the curse of knowledge, which we all have, and maybe you can also talk about that. Why don't you talk about that? The communication is one of the main topics of the book, one of the core, I think, 6 topics under which some of those dynamics, it's a big topic. But talk to me about the curse of knowledge and how can we deal with that?
Yeah, I think the curse of knowledge is a psychological concept that you assume that other people know exactly the details that you already know in that level of depth. And the smarter you become, the more it becomes a problem for you because your world becomes more and more obvious. In the beginning, you are a beginner and you don't know a lot. So when you start your career, you run around and say, I don't know how this program works. I don't know how a PowerPoint presentation should be made. I don't know how a project should be set up. So you're curious, you ask a lot of detailed questions. And the curse of knowledge is kind of the opposite. The more you did things regularly, let's take something out of business. If you are a good cook and you know how to cook very well, so for you it's obvious you have to wash the vegetables and the ingredients before you cook them and peel them and process them. But if somebody is new to it, they will say, so what's the first thing I do? The first thing I do is I wash the carrots and then I cut them and then I put them in hot water. So you give very precise information about the process, while the more you stand in the kitchen, the less you talk about these details. You say, you boil the carrots for 10 minutes, then you peel them, and then you do X, Y, Z. I'm not a good cook, so I have to be honest. There was a tricky example for me. But you see the point. It's basically about our brain is highly efficient, and it always wants to take the shortcut. So once we know something very well, in your brain is like a pathway that makes it faster. Let's not process the whole steps and talk about all 20 details. Let's talk about from A to D, because B, C, and D is already automized. And we have to be easy with us because it's so when you tell that to people, it sounds so obvious. Yeah, sure, I have to tell all the details, then everything is understandable. But our brain is working against us in that moment. Our brain is taking the shortcut because it's more efficient. I started with the whole dynamic group communication because obviously, as Paul Watzlawick says, everything is communication. It's important for me that we don't have a look on communication patterns. What I try to highlight is how do people feel once they stuck in that loop. And when you have the knowledge of curse, the curse of knowledge, then as a leader, you might feel the world is not understanding you. Because for you, this is all obvious, and your employees are all, I'm sorry to say, idiots who don't understand you. And that is an isolated place, and that might give you the feeling when you join a team newly that doesn't know you and that is not aware of your way of working, that you are alone. And what happens next is you try to pressure this team more because you want to perform and this team is not understanding you. And then you isolate yourself as a manager and you might go the direction that you manage this team too hard or that you manage the team with micromanagement, that you take over more responsibility. And this is the perspective of the leader. And on the other hand, as a team, if a leader comes that talks unclear, your self-confidence erodes, you feel less and less you can apply your skills, you feel less and less valuable, you feel scared, you might tend to freeze, and you see the performance goes down in 2 to 3 weeks if that happens. And I've worked with teams that established that kind of effect over years. So they just changed their working style to, be more frictionless. They tried avoiding strategies. So the team leader became a bit more micromanaging. The team became a bit less performing. And then this loop returns and returns and returns and performance goes down, even though everything is fine on the surface. And people like each other. It doesn't have to be that there is always a fight or a conflict. This is what's happening under the skin or behind the curtain. And I try to show what happens inside of us. So each dynamic explains how does that feel for an individual, how does that impact the organization, what happens in our brain, and what can we do against that. And I think that's something that we rarely do. I'm advocating for the poor leaders who always get demanded to be superior persons. There's this high expectation, you are higher in the hierarchy, you have to be a better human. I don't think so. I think we all face the same complex situations of fear, of, frightening situations. We all get triggered by the same things. We all want to be loved. We all want to be successful. And that's something we often oversee, that leaders have the same needs as employees. And on the other hand, I gotta be fair, there are many leaders who don't consider their employees as human beings. And this is a strong call to action for them as well to understand just because you gave a vague briefing, the self-confidence of your employee might, erode. And that does something to human beings far out of their job. Because if you feel you're not successful in your job, you might go home and feel not successful as a person. That has an impact on your private relationships and so on and so forth. But my book is only focusing on the impact in the work area.
And just on the topic of the communication, so we can close the topic, obviously there's 45 dynamics that are covered in the book, so we cannot cover them all. I just want to emphasize on a few of them, but one of them that stuck with me was tone in emails. And one of the statistics in the book, you say that, I think it was McKinsey that said that 28% of the time people spend at work is spent on email. Mm-hmm. 28% of your working week is spent on email. And you talk about the importance of the right tone in emails. And I mean, I'm telling you, I've had this issue during COVID times and working from home. And when I did not have so much time to get to know my people and for them to get to know me. And when you write a message, instead of calling somebody, having a video call, it can be misinterpreted often. And I don't think we are so enough aware about how our message gets perceived on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, first of all, we communicate a lot in email, in Slack. For me, this is not only about email. Yeah, I picked it out because it's the most common scenario that somebody writes an email that is very half-hearted. We are a bit more giving when it's in a messenger, because in a messenger we are all used to just send one sentence and that's it. But what happens in our brain is that our amygdala, you remember the flight, fright, and freeze response, it's very in the middle of our head, has another function. It closes the emotional gap of a message. So if you are writing me an email and it's inconsistent and there are some aspects missing, like you only give me facts and you tell me, Martin, you have to clean up your room and then send an email to our client. Then you're not talking about how is our relationship with us. Are you mad about me? Are you happy about that I'm here? How do you feel about me? And if we know each other good, that's no problem. If our relationship is well established, if everything is fine and there's no uncertainty, I will take that as a fact-based email and everything is good. But in COVID, as you mentioned the example, nothing was clear. Everything was unclear. Things in general changed. And that's something that happens in organizations all the time. A new software comes, a new director is arriving, a team gets restructured. All that stuff causes external uncertainty in our brain, and it makes us more volatile to interpret an email on a personal level. And you can send me the same email. If I have a bad day, my brain might say, ooh, I think Stoyan is mad at me. He didn't ask, how are you doing, Martin? And besides this interpretation of our brain about what is our relationship basis, I read a lot of emails that should have never been sent. So we got to be very fair. There is a lot of email communication going on in a mostly conservative, more hierarchical organizations that are filled with emotions that are very negative. So a lot of managers I've worked with showed me emails where they really went off their aggression, where they said, Stoyan, how can you not know that? It's pretty stupid, but here I am explaining you that. You have to clean up the room and then call the client. And it's hard for me to give a nice advocacy on that. At the end, it's a manager who has potential in emotional regulation, and it's a manager who might underestimate the power of words. But these are emails, and these are true examples that I read. And what it does to an employee is it erodes the relationship trust, it erodes the trust, it might damage their self-confidence, it might damage their performance ability. And so I come up with this very easy hack. It's called the Read It Out Loud test. If you are unsure about the email you send, you should read it out loud. And imagine you tell that to your daughter, to your kid, to your wife. And if, hopefully, you don't do that to people who are very close to you, so people get a second filter of thinking how much emotion is in my email. When I work with managers who struggle with that, we print them out and read them. Because when your brain is processing that by hearing it through your own voice, it reflects on it. So once you speak that out loud, this information goes in your brain, get processed again in the front part of your brain, and it might say, wow, that sounds really rude. But if you just type it, your brain is more or less in a bypass function. So it doesn't hear it, it doesn't process it in the same filtering way. And you might think that's completely okay because you are under stress. Once again, I advocate that our brain sometimes is really bad. So when we have a lot of stress, when we have a lot of emotions, when we feel a lot of emotions inside of us because we are more on a choleric side or we have, high emotions appearing under stress, then you might feel it's normal because that's your everyday situation. You feel all the time angry, so you send an email that it is angry, and for you it's the normal baseline of communication. I'm not saying that's right, but I'm saying that some people are not aware of that. And that's something that really struck me, and I try to break, a bit of a portion for them and say it's important that they get a hack to learn how to overcome that. And, in psychology, there is no black and white, so it's about tendencies. And if you have a lot of negative emotions, that's something you can learn to train your emotional regulation, and you can learn to deal, to find good channels for that negative emotions that you have. But as a manager or as a colleague, you need to make sure this email sounds professional and is not destroying or eroding the relationship you have with that peer, because otherwise you cannot collaborate and work and perform and function. And what struck me the most is that employees don't dare to speak up when they receive these emails. And that's something for the managers. Probably that happens sometimes, that you send an email that is too fact-based, or, a bit too tight, or it has a sub-note of aggression in it. It doesn't always have to be so radical. Be aware that employees go home, they think about it, they take it personal, this crawls under their skin, but they very likely will not tell you, because the fear reaction in your brain is very strong, and very likely they don't feel safe to tell you that and say, hey, Stoyan, I really didn't like your message. There's one deal I make with my teams, is I always say, don't go with anger in the weekend or in bed. So if you're really angry about work, call me at the end of the day and tell me. We will not solve it, but I want to hear it. And we all have that situation that sometimes we sit there and think, thank you, Stoyan, for sending me that email. Now I have a shitload to do, and you fucked up my afternoon or whatever it is. And I advocate for my teams to do that, to just share the information, not expecting a salvation, but just saying, hey, Stoyan, I received that mail. It made me a bit feel grumpy. And then you can work on the relationship and not on the fact aspect, and say, hey, I'm really sorry. It was needed. Let's clarify it tomorrow or in the coming days in a meeting. But be aware your employees very likely will accept this form of microaggression or direct aggression in emails. And that's why it's so important. We send a lot of emails. I read recently it's more than 100 emails you receive a day if you work in an organization plus 1,000 employees. So it's a lot of information going on. There is a second aspect about the information overload. So what we do with that much information, because our brain cannot process it. But in tone of emails, it's really about that we should reflect and use this natural break by talking it out loud, so our brain can process the message again and helps us to think, especially when you're stressed. And I know that sounds like an unneeded extra effort, but it's worth, because the damage you can create out of that emotionality is really big.
Talking about emotions, man, what an important topic, and you cover it in many of those 45 dynamics. But there's this dynamic emotional contagion. One person's stress or cynicism infecting the entire team. On the opposite side, could be the opposite, right? Could be somebody with the positive attitude, who's always looking at solutions, is impacting the whole team positively. But we all know the negativity bias, how much cynicism and negativity and anything to do with negativity is affecting us way more. 10 people give you good feedback on your speech, Martin, and there's this one person that says something really, really bad. Which one do you remember? Right? The one that's negative. And the same thing happens in companies, in organizations. You have this peak performer, they're really good in doing their job, but they keep on saying, this company, this is not okay. Why is this manager? They keep on spreading negative energy, and it's impacting, it's affecting everybody else. So let's maybe dive into this kind of topic. What is this all about, and how can we improve our culture when it comes to emotional contagion?
I think the first aspect is, this is not a soft skill topic. This is a data performance topic. There is a Stanford research that a leader who shows up more stressed than averagely, so in a high stress situation, interacts with his team for 2 weeks, and it decreases the performance of a team by 15%. And this is like there's a lot more research, long-term research, but we have to be aware that the stress you bring into your team is directly affecting the performance of your team. The team has the same amount of work. The team has the same context, the same situation. And that's the phenomenon of psychological contagion. So we have to be aware that if we bring in stress, negative emotions, whatever are the unprocessed emotions, they are directly contagious to an organization. And there are multiple aspects of that. First of all, you have to be aware that you become like your boss sooner or later. So you should have a good look. Who is your boss? How close do you work with that boss? Because there is, in Austria, we have that saying that pet owners become like their pets, or the other way around. So if you have a dog, your dog looks like you, and the other way around. It's a bit similar to the relationship to your boss if you work on a regular basis together. Their working style will directly impacting your working style. So if you have a boss who is very chaotic, that has a negative impact on your working style. If you have a boss who's very clear, very structured, very focused, very positive, very resource driven, that will impact you as well. So make sure you pick a team, but as well a boss that is really, role modeling something you are already liking, you already have in your working style, or you want in your working style. And as you said very correctly, be aware that when you enter a room that's not only limited to managers, you can change the energy. So if I go into a meeting, I hate sitting around and not getting progress. So my natural demand on an environment is, let's make some progress. And I don't sit 60 minutes in a meeting where we just talk about stuff and don't get, a meter forward. And that's the energy I try to offer in a team. And I shape the role of the other people's by my behavior on purpose. Being aware of what is the demand or what is the solution you want to bring in a room and really executing that is very important because you can positively contage people. And we all know this person that comes with a smile every day and is, infectious to everyone else and makes you happy and gives you a good feeling. And that's the minimum way of creating value in an organization. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just need to be the happiest person or the one who's most aware of that your emotions are contagious. And if you have the ability to bring in positive energy, people will realize that. I like that there's the saying in Austria, that the front receptionist of a company is, the business card of an organization. So if there is somebody who's really welcoming, we had a preparation before with your colleague Nicoletta, and I think she's a good example. She has so much positive, solution-oriented approach with always a happiness. She was calling with us until she went to the underground. So that changes the mood of a call immediately. And we have to be aware it's not always about the expert roles and it's not always about being the smartest. It's about what emotion do you provide, what energy do you provide to form a good team. And there are many managers out there who are not the smartest in their discipline, but they know how to manage emotions and they know how to deal with negative emotions because you have to be careful. If someone in your team is struggling for a very long time, they will negatively impact your team. And you have to think about what you do. And my personal approach is, I rather allow someone to go home, take a nap, come back with a better mood, than accepting a bad mood over weeks, because it's damaging people who are good performing. And that's something that is not always and everywhere possible, but we have to be aware emotions are contagious and they are a performance driver. It's not only about well-being. That's a nice side effect, but I'm a capitalist. I'm a businessman. I like to see good performance. And when you don't consider the emotions of your team, you don't consider the performance of your team. Simple as that.
I love you sharing all this, man. A couple of points here to summarize this section. First of all, it starts with recruitment. Like, often we look at bigger organizations, especially when they have to hire many people, they look at the expertise, the CV, the background, the skill set a little bit more, and maybe neglect a little bit the attitude of the person, how positive they are, how are they going to affect everybody and enhance everybody's performance because of always looking for solutions, always positive, listening to people. By the way, there's a great little tool. Can you just share maybe this one, and I'll be back to my thought. But you talk about the 3 second rule when it comes to listening.
Yeah, let things sink. Very, very simple. If you speak to a person, let it sink. Your brain can take up to 3 seconds until it's really processed information. And that's something we hardly ever do. And you saw me right a minute ago, when I'd get in my temper, I'd speak and speak and speak and speak. And it's important to take a break. And that's, Stoyan, something I really loved. You've been on my podcast recently. And when I was editing the podcast series, I realized that you make these breaks very naturally, and you make a stop and you let it sink, and then you go on. And it's very clearly visible that you work a lot with people. Our brain sometimes needs a breather. And when we get hammered with information, it's very important to utilize this 3 second rule to give our brain a break, especially if you give negative feedback. It's important to let it sink, because then comes the defense mechanism that pushes back, and then we regulate the self mechanism. So sometimes it's good to wait 10 seconds, but I really think it's important to understand our brain is like a Windows computer that sometimes have this 100% capacity is maxed out of processing power, and then wait a bit and then it goes down again. I cannot underline that enough, that we have to be understanding our brain is really great, but it's sometimes really as well a burden that we have to consider, and we need to be aware this hardware that we have in our head is shaped in thousands of years, and we've never been in a situation where we received so much information, so much possibilities, so much volatilities, and our brain is slowly adapting on that.
Talking about we've never been in such a situation. I remember 20, 30 years ago, the perception about the corporate world, the business world, has been very hierarchical, right? Like authoritarian in a way, like you are the leadership position, so that the power is with you, right? Because you earn to be the executive, you learn to be at this position, and I have to listen to you because I'm under you. But let's bring the elephant in the room, right? Artificial intelligence is here, and it's here to stay. And you have a mini chapter in the book focused on just that. Power shifts in the AI-driven world. How is AI disrupting the power dynamics?
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the most interesting aspects at the moment when we look at power in an organization. So who is the boss? And it started already with digitalizations. Couple of years ago, I worked with a law company where senior partners did not like to work with digital solutions. And they hated it. And it was very counterintuitive, because senior lawyers have a high academic knowledge. They tend to be quite intelligent. They tend to have, high communication skills. So it was a bit confusing for the owner of this. It's a big law firm with multi-hundreds of lawyers. It was a bit counterintuitive why they are not adapting to that, why they don't accept digital solutions. And everything I tell about these digital solutions is true for AI, maximized by 10. So we did a little research, and I made some interviews with the senior partners. And what I found out is that they feel inferior applying their skills on digital solutions compared to young digital native juniors. So the 20-something-year-old internee understands the tool in 5 minutes, and it takes me 5 hours to understand it. And what happened there is, like, law firms in Austria, at least, are very hierarchical. So there is a seniority principle that the longer you are there, the more knowledge you gained about law cases, the more powerful you are. And what they didn't like is the unfair advantage for young people to be faster in the digitalization. And how we solved that was quite simple. We started the digital training program with the senior partners a year before we did it with the junior people. So we equaled out and we gave the seniors the possibilities to stay in a senior role, while the younger team, merged into that program a bit later. So they had an advantage to say, I already know the interface, I already talked to a guy, I already had, and that's where basically status confirming power messages that gave them, an equivalent of the power they had before. But what happens now with AI is it's democratizing knowledge top to toe, and it changes the speed and the performance levels dramatically. So I'm coming from advertising originally, and Stoyan, you and me know the time it takes to create a 60 seconds TV commercial used to be in the past 2 months run through time from the concept to the client approval to doing that to shooting it to post-production to delivering it to adapting it and then rolling it out.
And that'll be a stretch.
Yes. And today you go to ChatGPT, whatever it's called, you type in a prompt and you can do that in half a day alone without budget. And this is a massive shift of power. So people feel consciously or subconsciously this power shift that is happening. And it's not about losing your job. It's about people are able to do stuff that I'm not able to do anymore. And this will separate the generations, but as well the people, from people who go with the AI dynamic and people who rebel against it. And as an organization, this is very critical to understand. It's not about learning a tool. It's not about learning the function. It's not about becoming a prompt engineer. It's about there will be people who have strong resistance against AI because it's a power shift. It's a power problem for your organization. And now thinking of a bigger company, if your top management belongs to the people who own a lot of power and are scared of losing that power through AI, your company might not be there in a couple of years anymore, because power problems tend to be very persistent. So you define and fight against the change very strongly. And what you can do is, bringing that power conflicts on the surface. And this is not something I'm worried about a designer sitting somewhere worried about a new tool. They usually adapt easier and say, okay, it's a new Photoshop, it's a new software I have to deal with. That's what you go through. But the higher you go in the hierarchy, the more important power is in your organization. The more risky AI is if it, doesn't involve the stakeholders and give them a place of superiority where they stay in power. And how can you do that? You can create boot camps for them. You can, make early adapter sessions. You can give them a lot of information and access. But most of all, you need to be aware it's not about an ability. It's not about a skill. It's about power that they might lose through this tool.
That's a really good point, man. And having these conversations and addressing those kind of issues and having them to understand that it's in their executives who might be a little bit more traditional and more resistant to the changes and to AI adoption changes, to kind of get them to sell them on the idea that it's in their own interest, in the company's financial interest, in the company's prospects and future interest, in their own interest as executives, if they want to sustain their level of influence and power, to start having some initiatives, to start opening up, to start incorporating different tools and being at the forefront. What a great point, man. I haven't thought about it.
And the important thing to line out is you don't talk openly about power struggles. So none of the lawyers I worked with told me, hey, Martin, I feel stupid next to my junior. That's not how we are wired, at least in the Western hemisphere. We are not talking about power struggles because it shows up our ego. It shows up our, individuality in a taking and in a demanding way. So what you can do is you can create safe spaces where people get confronted with that information. Like I did one-on-one interviews and we built a lot of rapport. And I'm known to, ask that questions and say, if I would be in your shoes, I would shit my pants because the 20-year-old might be faster than you. And what does that mean for you? You have 5 years left until you go to pension. That's very provocative. I would not always recommend to talk like that. But you need to create a safe space where people get confronted with that. It's not about, like everybody will say in top management, I'm pro AI, because everybody understands you're stupid if you don't say that. But that doesn't mean they feel it. That doesn't mean they believe it. And most of all, that doesn't mean they don't feel the power loss. So the problem more is that people don't share that information with you. If you have someone obviously rebelling, that's great. You can work on that. And there is a make it or break it. You can try to please that person, give good arguments, kill them up, or exchange them in a very radical way if it's a very top-notch position that has a high influence on your organization. But the bigger problem for organization is that we don't talk about power struggles. This is, think of a private relationship. When you have a fight with a friend or with a girlfriend, you never say, at the end, it's about my ego and I just want to be right. That's not how we interact. And that's not what's happening in the business world either. So everyone is raising their hand at the moment, from my perspective, on top management and top management -1, and says, yes, AI is good. But you have to look a bit more specific on the behaviors. Do they run projects that don't achieve results? Do they run projects that are not bold, that are not courageous? Do they, say yes, but then act differently? Behavior is a very good indicator for truth. So if you want to know the truth, don't listen to what people say, look how they act, look at the outcome behaviors. And that's going to be a make or break for a lot of companies, especially for more conservative areas. I'm talking about banking industry, insurance industry. So everywhere where we have a bit, later mature, innovative organizations, that's going to be tough because they have 75, 80% of power dynamics in their organization. If you are a startup that is highly digital, you don't have to worry about that. It's very likely not impacting you. It might even give you more of a boost, or it might, change your market perception immediately. That's a different challenges. But if you have a conservative, power-driven organization, you really need to make sure to create a safe space where people can speak up their concerns.
Nicely said, man. And undoubtedly, AI is the biggest disruptor, and it's going to be the biggest disruptor of workplace dynamics in the years to come. Martin, what an episode, man! Thanks so much for joining me today. Just for everybody who's been listening and made it to the end of the episode, can you give us a bit of a summary about your book? Like, why should people buy it? Who is this book for? And also, where could people find you if they need your help as a consultant and somebody who can come in and help their organization?
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for the question, and thanks for the time it was running by. I did not have the easiest start today, as you know, so I was already woken up by my house members at 6:30, and it made so much fun to talk with you. My passion is deeply into helping humans, and this book is for everyone who says, I want to understand why humans suffer, why humans thrive, why there is a difference, even though all have, similar conditions. If you are interested in psychology, it's a book you definitely should check out. If you are new to psychology, it's not super deep, so don't worry. It comes on a quite higher price point because it substitutes a workshop or a multiple days workshop. You have, when you work through that 45 dynamics, you very likely take 3 to 4 months to do that, to digest it. And it comes with a self-assessment tool, so you can find out where to start and what you need for your organization right now. The book is available on Amazon. I want to drop in one free copy of the book to the listeners here. So I know, Stoyan, you have a great audience. So if somebody feels I need to have that book and don't want or can afford it or want to be a lucky one, reach out to Stoyan, give him a ping. He will do a lottery, and I'm happy to send you a copy as thank you for tuning in and listening in. if people want to stay in contact with me, I think LinkedIn is my main channel. I run a podcast called Business and Psychology together with a psychologist, where we talk about one psychological principle each episode in only 10 minutes. So it's something you can consume during your lunch break and just get, a bit of more psychological vocabulary. I run a second podcast called Visible Leader, wherein I invite people like Stoyan to tell how they made their way and how they became successful, because I believe we need to amplify the topics that matter. If you want to do business, you find me. I'm pretty confident about that. But most of all, it's important for everyone who's out there and sitting in a workplace dynamic where you have the feeling, I have a bad boss, I suffer from bad conditions, I suffer from too much stress, too much pain. And no matter if you're an employee or a leader, please be aware there is, most of the time, it's not your fault. Most of the time, it's a dynamic that gets triggered by too little time to talk about it, too little clarity on what's going on in the dynamic of your workplace. I created a chatbot for those who are interested and don't want to read the book. It's in a beta test. If you want, ping me on Martin Wolf. You will find me Business and Psychology on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share that link with you. There is all the knowledge of my book in it, and you get 5 free questions about your situation. Like, I have a dominant colleague. How do I deal with this bad guy? Whatever you want. It's thanks to AI multilingual, so you don't have to speak English, you don't have to speak German, you just can consume it in your mother tongue. And I think that's the future of reading. So probably not everyone will stuck to a book, and some people will just upload their book into an AI and then ask them the questions they really want to know. I'm curious to experiment with that.
Thank you so much, Martin. I just want to give you credit for 2 things. First of all, from the time I met you, you've always been a giver. You've always been somebody who is very generous, who always try to help, who always try to connect people, not transactionally, but genuinely, because you want to help and you want to amplify good ideas, good projects, and connect good people. So firstly, that. Secondly, because you're going deep, man. I checked your book, and I've been following your work, and you always research, you see the scientific study, you double down on case studies, like everything. It's you just go deep. You're well prepared, and I just wanna take a moment to recognize you for who you are, and I appreciate being your friend and collaborating and doing things together. Everybody, please go check out the book, check out Martin podcasts, and he's very, very social, I would say. So drop him a DM on LinkedIn if you have an idea, if you want to work with him, if you have a question even, or a comment after our episode here. And let's keep going, guys. Let's keep going. It's all about helping each other. So super grateful for have you all making it to the end of the episode. Grateful to Martin for such an amazing episode. Once again, back to the productivity mastery. Thanks so much, Martin. It's been great.
Thanks a lot, Stoyan.
Appreciate you. Appreciate everybody. Let's get going, guys. Let's be productive. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.